Okay, can we start about, Anthony, how you got into being a painter?
Well, I started from a very early age. I was always interested in art, and I think to a degree, I think it was not so much that I felt I was good at art, but I'm probably pretty much bad at everything else. So I found myself, I'd get sort of appreciation from the work I would do in art, and it was a very solitary kind of activity for me. And in those early days, I was very much a solitary person. I liked that kind of the act of just being on your own and just creating for yourself. And so, really, it's difficult to say why someone turns to art, or why someone's creative, or why someone needs to make a mark. But somehow, on some level, in some way, it made sense. It felt like it was right. And it could have been that everything else felt wrong. And this is the one thing that didn't feel wrong.
Well, you had very difficult family circumstances, as I understand.
Yes, I did, yes. So this has very much informed my art. I mean, my brother was, from a very early age, he was very violent.
This is your brother?
This is my brother. So I would have been 8 and he would have been 14, and this carried on for about 8 years. So he was very destructive. So one of the things he was destructive with is glass. He was always smashing glass. Windows, front door panes, televisions, aquariums. I mean, one of my abiding memories is the aquarium. Suddenly we were all sitting there in the living room, and suddenly a missile or whatever hurls through to the fish tank facade, and you have all these sort of fish flailing around in this image of glass and beautiful fish all fused on the floor. And so there was a very destructive element growing up in my life. And I think this has very much informed my art now, because all my art, everything I paint, all the objects I paint go into glass. And so I'm kind of inverting that kind of meaning of glass as a destructive emblem. And I'm kind of taking it back and reappropriating it. And, no longer is it an object which destroys beauty. And I'm talking about literal beauty, the physical things around us, but also metaphorical beauty, family life, my childhood, my brother's health and his childhood. That kind of beauty is being destroyed. So now I kind of invert that, and I use glass as a way of capturing beauty, of placing things in the glass and kind of reclaiming it and using it as a vehicle to make sense of my world today.
So, you are in fact a realist painter, but with a kind of surrealist overtone, is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I began very much a realist, and I think my paintings began to broaden out a bit, and I started doing a series of paintings called portal paintings. And this is where, when you think of realist work, I guess you tend to think of objects placed in a physical environment, a very tangible, concrete physical environment, on the table or whatever setting you generally place them. But then I began to take my objects and they began to find their own environment. And wow, that's a bright light. And so I created these portals. There was no longer a fixed place. I mean, you think of Caravaggio's the Medusa's head on the shield, and I think this is something you referred to before, Edward, that if suddenly you find this head is no longer in a real space, it's kind of hovering, it has its own existence, and the blood spurting from the neck is in its own space, which makes it a very unusual kind of representation for that period.
What you call portals are really like lenses, aren't they?
Yes, that's right, yes.
So that everything is seen under a lens, is that correct?
Yes, that's right, yes. So everything floats around in this environment, and this gave me more scope. I mean, when you think of traditional still life, you kind of conjure up these images of flower arranging, well, that goes there and that goes there, and you want to create this kind of composition which makes some kind of aesthetic sense. Or now with the portal paintings, now I'm free. It's like, oh, I'm no longer restricted to a bowl. I can create my environment.
But nevertheless, you are, in many respects, a very traditional painter, are you not? I mean to say, you paint with very traditional techniques.
I do. My techniques are all traditional, and even with the portal paintings, I began early on with doing portraiture, and I'd used a Flemish technique, or what I loosely refer to as the Flemish technique. I don't know the exact processes they used back then with Vermeer, but certainly you would say it's an indirect form of painting. So you'd have a layered technique, so you'd build up from your umber layers to a grisaille layer, and then you'd add all your glazes on top, and you'd get a kind of an optical effect where the light would pass through these multiple coloured glazes, through the grisaille, through the umber layer, it'd hit the white gesso and it would bounce back, and this would give an optical effect, a translucency, which is beautiful for human skin. I mean, it's absolutely ideal. And I thought, well, yeah, I've used that in portraiture, but also you can transfer this over to fruit. I mean, you think of fruit with its, like a plum with its skin, but beneath the skin is the flesh, and it's in some ways it's got the same properties as a young girl's blossoming, blooming face. So yeah, I've used very traditional techniques, and I kind of come in and out of a direct method of painting and an indirect method of painting.
Oh, where did you train?
I trained at Kingston. I had a dire time there. I was pretty appalling. It was a very conceptual school. And I was doing conceptual sculpture and painting, and I didn't really get it. And basically I was kicked out of my third year for, general slovenly behaviour, and with good reason. And so I kind of left with my tail between my legs, and I had to find my own way. I had to make my own sense, and I couldn't get my sense of what art meant to me in an art school. So it took me years to actually find make sense of what I'm about, and I had to refer back to some previous issues.
There are two comments here. First of all, in a way, it's a classic story of the artist rebelling against his environment, but in your case it's a story of the artist rebelling against a vision of avant-gardism, isn't it?
Yes, I mean there's very much that, but even a stance against avant-gardism, against conceptualism, is in itself a kind of conceptual stance. I mean, I'm against conceptualism. That's an idea. That's a concept in itself. It's to do with extremes.
The long perspective of revolutions against the revolution against naturalism, the revolution against conceptualism. It all goes back, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I thought, right. I'm not interested in conceptual art. I mean, I've got nothing against it, and there's a good place for it. It's intellectually stimulating, but it just wasn't for me. And I thought, I'll go back to the humblest things you can find. It has to be something in nature. So I went back to the simplest fruit. This is, this people might find this laughable that you're going to paint fruit, but I thought, well, why not? It's simple and it's honest and it's nature. So I returned to that, and I soon, began to wonder, why. And that's where the glass came in, and the psychological element came in with, my brother and his destructive nature with glass. And so I found myself painting with a strong conceptual underpinning in many regards. So there's a strange dichotomy there, and
But you had it took you some time to find yourself. What did you do in the intervening period after you were thrown out of art school or left art school, and before you found your way as a painter?
Well, first I did the traditional thing when you get thrown out of art school, which is travel. So I went around 6 months travelling around India, and in a complete daze really. Thinking, what do I do now? Everything that I thought I understood was no longer there, and so when I came back, I had to reappraise things. And I would say for many years I was out in the hinterland. I didn't know what to do, where to go, or anything. I couldn't make sense of anything. I'm a graphic designer, self-taught graphic designer, and I worked in magazines and various other design projects, and then I turned my hand to photography. I thought I'll become a photographer. That didn't quite work out, and then I wrote 3 attempts at novels, all of which were rejected, and So that didn't quite work out, and I thought, hold on, I lost something which really meant something to me at art school. I was kicked out, okay, but I allowed something to be taken away from me, or I allowed myself to believe that something had been taken away from me. But I had to re-find it. I had to relearn that art belongs to me. It doesn't belong to an art school or anyone else, and you don't need anyone else to say you can do art, or you're a good artist or you're a bad artist. You can just do it. And so it took me 20 years to reconnect and find my love and find my passion for art.
So, okay, we've talked about how you came to be what you are. What's your vision of the future? What's your idea of where you might go?
Well, I see a future without fruit. I see a future without fruit. Well, you always return to where, perhaps where you began, I don't know. But I suddenly have an idea of these big portal paintings, and I see these with nudes in them, female forms inside these big portals. Essentially, I put things in which I find beautiful. So, of course, I find the female form beautiful. But I'm also aware that, this is how do you go about portraying or representing the female form? It's been done for thousands by thousands of artists, and what can I do? And I began to think about, I thought about my fruit and how I referred back to my kind of childhood to make sense of where to go with it. And similarly with the nudes, I refer back to my childhood. So my perceptions of the female form are very mixed as a young man. And it suddenly, when I was thinking about these portals and the nudes, I was beginning to think, well, I haven't got a fixed image of male and female sex. It's suddenly I've got this kind of morphed, fused image. It kind of melts between the two. And so when I paint the female form, in my back of my head is like this third kind of androgynous figure hovering between the two. And somehow I'm going to try and reflect that in the work. There's going to be some distortions with the female form. And this will make some reference to my, my strange, distorted perception of male and female sexes.
Well, you have a partly Indian background, don't you?
That's correct, yeah.
And do you think this has something to do with what one sees in some classical forms of Indian art, both Indian sculpture, where male forms are often extremely sinuous and female?
Yes. I mean, I very much came across the Hijra community in India, but I think also in Michelangelo, where you see a strange kind of sense of androgyny. It may be something to do with the fact that he had limited access to female models. It may be the fact that he was homosexual and he regarded the male form was more of an ideal than the female form. But where you see instances of the female form, you see a kind of a maleness incorporated into these female bodies. So there's this, but you think of David, it's got a very feminine quality, the statue of David, but it's absolutely beautiful. So where you get that combination, for me, then for me you're getting an ideal beauty.
So there are lots of echoes in your work. That for you the art of the past is a kind of echo chamber, but it produces, like echo chambers do, new sounds. That is, it doesn't simply reflect to you, back to you, the sound which is made, the echo chamber, but it makes a new sound from the one you throw at it.
Yes, exactly. I mean, you want to make sense of what you're doing, and you refer back, and you use that which has been done, in a sense, to give your work some kind of underpinning, some kind of way of making sense of it. And I find with Michelangelo, there is a great sense there for me in his work.
So you're not an appropriationist in the modern sense?
No, I'm not that kind of appropriationist. No, I'm not. Well, I'll allow you and other eminent historians to judge that for me.
Okay, I'm sure we will.
Thank you. Lovely. Thank you.